How long have you been with us, Olivia? Mr. Thorne's question hung in the cold, modern air of his office. 28 years, I stated, my voice steadier than I felt. Is that right? Marcus Thorne leaned back slightly in his imposing leather chair, a picture of calculated indifference. His tone was unnervingly casual, almost bored. That's quite a long time. He offered the observation as if commenting on the weather. 28 years and 11 months, to be precise. I corrected him, a knot tightening in my stomach as my eyes fixed on the sleek tablet lying on his otherwise empty desk. That device felt more ominous than any paper folder ever could. In all my time at Apex Innovations Incorporated, decades spent navigating corporate complexities, I'd never been summoned to a vice president's office on a Friday afternoon like this. Never. Something was profoundly wrong. My name is Olivia Vance. I am 58 years old, and until approximately 5 minutes ago, I was the senior risk management officer for one of Cedar Creek's most prominent manufacturing firms. For nearly 29 years, I dedicated myself to ensuring Apex operated ethically and legally. I meticulously documented financial irregularities, procedural shortcuts, and compliance risks, standing firm against pressure when others sought easy fixes for complex problems. My pension, the culmination of a lifetime's work, was set to fully vest on Monday. Just 3 days separated me from that hard-earned security. It felt so close I could almost touch it. Mr. Thorne picked up the tablet, his movements economical and precise. He tapped the screen, turning it to face me. Due to departmental restructuring and the need for increased efficiency, we are terminating your employment. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, not once meeting mine. Effective immediately. The minimalist office, all sharp angles and cool tones, seemed to sway almost imperceptibly. Restructuring. Efficiency. Hollow words, especially considering Apex had just proudly announced record profits last quarter. This outlines your severance package, he continued, his perfectly manicured finger tapping the glass surface displaying the electronic document. You have until Monday morning to accept the terms and sign electronically. He paused, letting the implied threat hang in the air. Otherwise, the offer is withdrawn. Then, as an afterthought, Clara from HR will escort you to collect your personal belongings. A surge of white-hot anger should have consumed me. Shock, disbelief, the desperate urge to argue or plead, those would have been normal reactions. Instead, a chilling, unnatural calm settled over me. This wasn't a random casualty of corporate shuffling. This was targeted, calculated, timed with surgical precision to sever my ties just days before my pension became untouchable. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Thorne. My voice was quiet, betraying none of the turmoil inside as I reached for the offered tablet. I didn't bother reading the document then and there. I knew what it would contain. Mr. Thorne finally looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes at my composure. Perhaps he'd anticipated tears, shouting, a scene. But I'd built a career on recognizing patterns, on seeing the underlying structure beneath the surface noise. And the pattern here was starkly, brutally clear. I stood, instinctively smoothing the fabric of my skirt, a small, unconscious gesture of maintaining control. I turned and walked towards the door, my head held high, determined to exit with my dignity, if nothing else. Clara Mills from HR hovered awkwardly by my former workspace. Her expression a mixture of pity and fear as I began packing the few personal items that defined my long tenure. There was the framed photograph of my late husband, his warm smile a constant source of quiet strength. The small, resilient potted succulent Sophia had given me years ago, a reminder of my daughter's own strength, now grown with a family of her own in Denver. And the crystal plaque commemorating 25 years of service to Apex, now feeling like a relic from another lifetime. I didn't take much. The true substance of my career, the knowledge, the experience. The battles fought and won for the company's integrity, none of that could fit into the standard issue cardboard box Clara offered. I'm so sorry, Olivia, Clara whispered, her eyes darting nervously towards the impassive security guard waiting by the elevators, clearly assigned to escort me from the premises. This just isn't right. Her sympathy felt genuine, but constrained by her own precarious position within the hierarchy Thorne now dominated. It is what it is, Clara, I replied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Inside, however, a different certainty burned. This wasn't just wrong or unfair. It was calculated, deliberate, and quite possibly illegal. For the past 4 years, my meticulous documentation of financial irregularities and operational risks had intensified. The trend had accelerated dramatically since Marcus Thorne's arrival 8 months prior, bringing his reputation for ruthless efficiency with him. I had submitted detailed reports through the proper channels within the risk management division. I had flagged suspicious transaction patterns, questioned inflated projections, and presented concrete evidence of backdated quality control reports designed to conceal shipment delays and potential defects. Every single concern had been systematically dismissed, deliberately buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy, or outright returned with explicit instructions to focus on more pressing strategic initiatives. My attempts to uphold the company's own stated ethical standards had clearly marked me as an obstacle. As I walked through the gleaming, impersonal lobby for the very last time, the security guard held the heavy glass door open, his discomfort palpable. "Have a good weekend, Ms. Vance," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact, clearly uneasy with his part in this corporate execution. I managed a polite nod, the ghost of a smile touching my lips. "Thank you. I believe I will." The drive home through the familiar streets of Cedar Creek felt utterly surreal. 28 years and 11 months of unwavering dedication, loyalty, and professional integrity, all dismissed with a cold, impersonal tap on a tablet screen and summarized in the contents of a single cardboard box on the passenger seat beside me. The gentle April rain misted the windshield, blurring the familiar landscape of the Wisconsin town I called home. I passed the park where Sophia used to play as a child, the library where I'd spent countless hours researching regulations, the quiet streets leading to the modest house I'd kept running on my own since my husband passed away 12 years ago. My mind replayed the sacrifices made for Apex Innovations. The missed school concerts and parent-teacher conferences during Sophia's early years, sacrificed for late nights finalizing risk assessments. The family vacations interrupted by urgent calls about potential compliance breaches halfway across the country. The countless evenings and weekends spent poring over dense regulatory documents and financial statements that no one else seemed to have the patience, or perhaps the courage, to scrutinize so closely. I had poured the best years of my life into that company, trusting in the promise of a secure retirement, the pension I had diligently earned. Pulling into my driveway, I switched off the engine but remained sitting in the quiet car for a long moment, letting the full weight of the day's events settle upon me. The betrayal felt sharp, physical. Marcus Thorne. Only 8 months at Apex, yet long enough to dismantle decades of careful work and ethical practice. He'd arrived trailing a reputation for aggressive restructuring and cost-cutting achieved through questionable means at his previous company. I knew, from the moment he took over the operations division and began overriding established risk protocols, that a confrontation was inevitable. My refusal to sign off on his latest cost-saving initiative, a plan that blatantly skirted several key environmental and safety regulations, had clearly sealed my fate. What I hadn't anticipated was the sheer speed and ruthlessness of his move to eliminate me, the inconvenient voice of caution. Inside the quiet sanctuary of my home, I went through the familiar motions of making tea, the simple ritual grounding me slightly. Sitting at my familiar kitchen table, bathed in the soft afternoon light filtering through the window overlooking my small garden, I finally picked up the tablet Mr. Thorne had given me. I powered it on and opened the severance agreement. The terms were even more insulting than I'd expected. A paltry 3-month salary. In exchange, I was required to waive all future legal claims against Apex Innovations. Crucially, there was no mention of my pension, now just days from vesting. No continuation of healthcare benefits. Not a single word acknowledging nearly 3 decades of dedicated service. Just a severance payment contingent on my silence, a legal gag order disguised as corporate generosity. The electronic signature line beckoned, demanding acceptance by 9 a.m. Monday. They were counting on my fear, my presumed desperation, my potential lack of resources, to force me into signing quickly, without seeking legal counsel. This wasn't standard procedure for a long-serving employee. This was a calculated, targeted maneuver designed to strip me of what I had rightfully earned, silencing a potentially troublesome witness in the process. My hand trembled slightly, not with fear, but with a rising tide of cold anger. I carefully set the tablet aside, the offensive document glowing on its screen. I walked down the hallway to my home office, a small room filled with books, files, and the quiet presence of my late husband whose photograph sat on the desk. His belief in my meticulous nature had always been a source of strength. "Your attention to detail isn't a weakness, Olivia," he used to say. "It's your shield and your sword." Behind a row of unassuming family photo albums stood a sturdy, locked metal file cabinet. Not fireproof, perhaps, but secure. Inside, separate from my personal papers and insurance policies, was my own insurance policy of a different kind. For the past 4 years, ever since the financial reporting started looking subtly off, I had been methodically and discreetly bringing home copies of troubling documents. Not digital copies easily wiped or altered, but hard copies. I maintained detailed handwritten notes of suspicious conversations, directives that seemed ethically borderline, and saved printouts of emails that revealed patterns of misconduct and deliberate attempts to circumvent regulations. It wasn't that I had planned, initially, to become a whistleblower. It was simply that my professional instincts, honed over decades in risk management, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong at Apex. Protecting myself, and potentially the company from itself, felt like the only prudent course. I unlocked the cabinet and retrieved several folders, their contents meticulously organized. Loan applications submitted to CC Bank with clearly falsified asset valuations. Quarterly financial reports sent to investors with revenue figures demonstrably manipulated to meet unrealistic targets. Internal emails explicitly instructing mid-level managers to backdate quality control certifications to mask production delays. Evidence of environmental compliance corners being cut. It was all there, undeniable and damning. Over 1,000 pages documenting systematic fraud and regulatory non-compliance. A pattern that had undeniably accelerated and become more brazen under Marcus Thorne's leadership. I had reported every significant issue through the designated internal channels, first to my direct supervisor in risk management, then, when those concerns were ignored, escalating appropriately. Each attempt was met with deflection, dismissal, or thinly veiled warnings to stick to my assigned duties. My gaze fell on my personal phone lying on the desk. With a growing sense of resolve, I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a name I hadn't needed to call in several years. Julian Foster. He had been Apex's chief financial officer before I even joined the risk management division. A man known for his sharp intellect and unwavering integrity. He'd left Apex under circumstances that were never fully clarified, eventually landing a significant role at the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division. Julian had always respected my thoroughness, my refusal to cut corners, even when others in management found my diligence inconvenient. He would understand. He would know what to do. It's time, I thought, the decision solidifying within me. My finger hovered over his name, the gateway to a path I had never sought but now felt compelled to take. The next morning, Saturday, I woke with a clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in months. The sting of betrayal remained, but it was now overshadowed by a steely resolve. After a long, nearly 2-hour conversation with Julian the previous evening via an encrypted messaging app, the way forward was clear. Julian had listened intently, his face grim on the video call as I outlined the circumstances of my termination and described the nature of the documentation I possessed. His response was measured, professional, but underscored with a familiar indignation towards corporate malfeasance. "Olivia, this isn't just a potential wrongful termination suit," he'd stated gravely. "Based on everything you've described, Apex Innovations could be facing extremely serious securities violations. The timing? Stripping you of your pension days before it vests, that's egregious, but likely just the visible symptom of a much deeper problem." He had patiently explained the whistleblower protections afforded under SEC regulations, emphasizing the importance of securing legal counsel immediately. He then provided the name and contact information for Evelyn Hayes, a highly regarded attorney at Hayes and Associates, specializing in corporate law and whistleblower representation. "Do not sign anything they've given you, Olivia," Julian had cautioned firmly before ending the call. "And secure those documents. Make multiple copies. Keep them somewhere safe, off-site if possible." Acting on his advice, I booked an online consultation with Ms. Hayes for later that afternoon. Before that, however, I spent the entire morning at a local copy shop, meticulously duplicating every page of my evidence. I organized the copies into 3 identical, comprehensive packages, each indexed and chronologically ordered. The methodical work calmed my nerves, channeling the simmering anger and hurt into productive action. By noon, I had the packages ready, one destined for the SEC, one for my attorney, Ms. Hayes, and one securely stored away, leverage. Should it become necessary. My personal cell phone began ringing intermittently throughout the day. Caller ID showed Clara Mills from HR, then Marcus Thorne's direct line, and even a call from Apex's general counsel. I let each call go straight to voicemail, listening later to the increasingly urgent, bordering on frantic, messages. Olivia, it's Marcus. We really need that paperwork signed today. Let's resolve this amicably. Thorne's voice was tight, losing its earlier casualness. I can swing by your place to pick it up if that makes things easier. The offer felt more like a threat. The general counsel's message was more direct, laced with legalistic intimidation. Ms. Vance, this message is to formally notify you that it is imperative we receive your signed severance agreement before the close of business today. Saturday. Failure to comply could potentially jeopardize the severance package offered entirely. Their mounting desperation only confirmed my suspicions. They knew they were exposed. They understood the significance of the timing of my termination and were desperate to secure my silence before the weekend concluded. Before I had ample time to consult an attorney or consider other options. At precisely 4:30 p.m., my doorbell chimed insistently. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Marcus Thorne standing impatiently on my porch. His expensive, tailored suit and polished Italian shoes looked jarringly out of place in my quiet, middle-class Cedar Creek neighborhood. His luxury sedan gleamed ostentatiously at the curb. I remained motionless, silent, not even breathing loudly. Olivia, he called out, his voice sharp. Olivia, I know you're in there. Open the door. Silence. He tried the bell again, then rapped sharply on the door with his knuckles. This is utterly ridiculous, he snapped, his frustration audible through the solid wood. Just sign the damned papers, take the money. And we can all move on with our lives. I watched, unseen, as he finally gave up. He shoved a thick envelope into my mailbox with unnecessary force, then turned abruptly and strode back to his car, slamming the door before speeding away down the street. Only after his car disappeared around the corner did I venture out to retrieve the envelope. Inside was another printed copy of the severance agreement, identical to the one on the tablet. Scrawled across the top in aggressive handwriting was a note, final opportunity. Signed by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, my daughter Sophia called for our usual weekly chat. Despite my best efforts to sound normal, she immediately picked up on the underlying tension in my voice. Mom? What's wrong? She asked, concern evident even across the miles from Denver. You sound stressed. Is everything okay? I considered downplaying the situation, shielding her from the ugliness of it all. But Sophia was 30 years old now, a perceptive and capable woman with a family of her own. She deserved the truth. Apex terminated my employment yesterday, sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice as even as possible. A stunned silence met my words. Then, Sophia's voice, sharp with disbelief and anger. What? Terminated you? Mom, your pension vests on Monday. They can't just do that. It's not legal. Well, they did, Sophia, I replied wearily. But please don't worry. I'm already handling it. I have a plan. Handling it? Mom, what does that mean? Her protective instincts kicked in immediately. Do you need me to come home? I can book a flight first thing tomorrow. David can handle the kids for a few days. No, sweetheart, absolutely not, I insisted gently but firmly. Stay put. Enjoy your weekend with your family. Honestly, I have things well under control here. I've already spoken to someone, and I have legal counsel. After reassuring Sophia and ending the call, I sat alone in my living room as twilight deepened outside, painting the sky in hues of purple and gray. My thoughts turned to the meeting scheduled with the SEC, facilitated by Julian, set for Monday morning in Chicago. For years, I had tried diligently to address the mounting risks and ethical breaches internally at Apex. I had believed, perhaps naively, in the system, in the company's stated commitment to integrity, in the professionalism of its leadership. I had remained loyal, discreet, and professional, even as my carefully documented concerns were consistently ignored or actively suppressed. But Apex, under the influence of men like Thorne and the implicit complicity of others like Mr. Sterling, had made its choice. They had chosen profit over principle, expediency over ethics. And now, I had to make mine. I would not be signing their coercive agreement. I would not be silenced by their threats or their insulting offer of hush money. And most importantly, I would not allow them to casually discard nearly 3 decades of my professional life, my earned security, without facing the full consequences of their actions. Monday couldn't arrive soon enough. Monday morning dawned crisp and clear, mirroring the newfound clarity in my own mind. The anxiety of the weekend had solidified into a focused determination. I dressed meticulously in a conservative navy suit, the one I reserved for critical meetings, my personal suit of armor. Placing the securely packaged documentation into a sturdy briefcase felt like preparing for battle. In many ways, it was. The drive to the SEC's regional office in Chicago was filled with a mix of apprehension and righteousness. The weight of my decision, the potential repercussions for myself and for Apex, pressed down on me. Yet, overriding the fear was an unshakable conviction that I was doing the right thing, the only thing left to do. The SEC offices were housed in a modern federal building, all polished surfaces, frosted glass partitions, and an atmosphere of quiet, serious purpose. Julian met me in the lobby, his familiar face etched with a few more lines than I remembered. But his eyes still held the same sharp intelligence and hint of weary idealism. "Olivia," he greeted me, shaking my hand warmly, his grip firm and reassuring. "I truly wish we were reconnecting under better circumstances." "It's good to see you too, Julian," I replied, managing a small smile. "Thank you for taking this so seriously, and for acting so quickly." He nodded gravely. "What you described couldn't be ignored." He led me through security and down a quiet corridor to a secure conference room. Waiting inside were 2 individuals who introduced themselves as Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney with a direct, no-nonsense demeanor, and James Weston, a forensic accountant whose sharp eyes seemed to miss nothing. My attorney, Evelyn Hayes, had arrived earlier and was already seated, her calm presence a significant comfort. Introductions were made, brief and professional. Ms. Brennan began, her gaze steady on mine. "Ms. Vance, before we proceed, I need to confirm that you fully understand the implications of providing this information to us today. Once you formally submit these documents and provide your statement, an official investigation will be opened. This process, once initiated, cannot easily be reversed. Are you prepared for that?" I met her gaze directly, my voice firm. "Yes, Ms. Brennan. I understand completely. I am prepared." For the next 3 intensive hours, guided by Ms. Hayes and prompted by precise questions from Ms. Brennan and Mr. Weston, I meticulously walked them through the contents of my briefcase. I laid out the chronology of events, starting with the subtle financial reporting irregularities I'd first detected nearly 4 years prior, inconsistencies between shipping manifests and invoiced amounts, unusual patterns in accounts receivable aging. I presented the evidence of quality control certifications being deliberately backdated to align with shipment dates, potentially concealing product defects or regulatory non-compliance. I detailed the escalating pattern of revenue manipulation that had become rampant in recent quarters, particularly following Marcus Thorne's appointment as VP of Operations, linking it directly to his aggressive performance targets. James Weston examined the financial statements and supporting documents with intense focus, his pen occasionally underlining figures or making sharp notations. "These discrepancies, they aren't minor accounting errors, Ms. Vance," he stated grimly after reviewing a set of quarterly reports against internal production data. "Based on this preliminary review, it appears the company has been systematically overstating its revenues by potentially 15 to 20% for at least the past 2 fiscal years. That constitutes significant securities fraud. And you documented and reported these specific issues internally through established channels? Angela Brennan asked, leaning forward slightly. Yes, multiple times, I confirmed, producing copies of my dated memos to the Risk Management Division head. Emails detailing specific concerns sent to the Internal Audit Committee. And records of meeting requests that were either denied or resulted in no tangible action. Each time, I explained, my voice tight with remembered frustration, I was either told the issues were being addressed, that my interpretation of the data was flawed, or, more recently, simply ignored. When Mr. Thorne arrived 8 months ago, my reports concerning operational risks started being rerouted directly to his office, where they effectively vanished without a trace. Julian Foster, who had remained mostly silent, observing intently, leaned forward. And it is your firm belief, Olivia, that your termination last Friday was directly linked to your persistent reporting of these issues and your refusal to certify compliance on Mr. Thorne's latest initiatives? Without any question, I stated firmly. The timing, just 3 days before my pension fully vested, is too precise to be coincidental. But it's more than just the pension. I had recently formally documented and refused to approve several major components of Mr. Thorne's latest cost-cutting initiative, citing significant regulatory and safety risks. He needed me silenced and removed before I could escalate those concerns further, potentially to the board or external regulators. As the lengthy meeting concluded, Ms. Brennan outlined the immediate next steps. We will need to take your formal, sworn statement today, Ms. Vance, she explained. Following that, we will commence a formal investigation based on the information and documentation you've provided. Typically, such investigations remain confidential until the Commission determines whether enforcement action is warranted. How long might that process take? I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Ms. Hayes placed a reassuring hand briefly on my arm. It varies depending on the complexity of the case, Ms. Brennan replied cautiously. However, given the substantial documentation you've provided and the apparent clarity of the misconduct described, the Commission may choose to move on this matter quite expeditiously. I hadn't even made it back to the parking garage when my personal cell phone rang, displaying Clara Mills' number. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was trembling, almost frantic. Olivia? Oh, thank goodness you answered. Something major is happening here. The board just convened an emergency, unscheduled meeting. Mr. Thorne has been locked in his office all morning, refusing to speak to anyone. And there are rumors flying everywhere that SEC investigators contacted our general counsel early this morning. So, the wheels were already turning, faster than even Ms. Brennan had hinted. The SEC must have made immediate, official contact with Apex's legal team right after our meeting concluded. The carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. I'm not entirely surprised, Clara, I said, keeping my voice deliberately calm. A pause, then Clara's hesitant question, heavy with implication. Olivia, did you? Was it you who reported something? I simply did what my job required, Clara, I replied carefully. What I should have perhaps done more forcefully years ago. What's the status of my termination paperwork? The severance agreement they demanded I sign? That's the other reason I called. Clara almost sobbed with relief or stress, it was hard to tell. The executive committee is apparently reviewing your entire termination file right now. They've put an immediate hold on everything related to your departure until further notice. An hour later, as I navigated the interstate back towards Cedar Creek, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed the main number for Apex headquarters, followed by the name Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board, a man from the founding family dynasty who, in our few previous interactions over the decades, had barely acknowledged my existence beyond a cursory nod. I let it ring, composing myself, then answered professionally. Olivia Vance speaking. Ms. Vance, his voice, usually smooth and confident, sounded strained, almost thin. Mr. Sterling here. It appears we have a situation unfolding that may require your input. Your perspective. A pause. Would you perhaps be willing and available to come back to the office tomorrow morning? Say, 10 a.m.? To discuss matters. The audacity, after Friday's dismissal, was breathtaking. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mr. Sterling, I replied coolly, echoing the advice Ms. Hayes had given me. Given the circumstances of my termination and the nature of the issues involved, any further discussion would need to include my legal counsel, Ms. Evelyn Hayes. And depending on the subject matter, potentially representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission as well. I'm sure you understand the necessity for proper protocols now. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, thick with unspoken panic. Finally, he cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. I see. Yes. Perhaps we can work to arrange something more formal then. Through counsel. That would be appropriate, Mr. Sterling, I confirmed politely before ending the call. As I disconnected, I felt no triumph, no surge of vindication. Only a profound weariness, a deep sadness at the sheer, avoidable necessity of it all. I had never aspired to be a whistleblower. My professional life was dedicated to preventing risks, ensuring compliance, protecting the company from within. I had only ever wanted to do my job with the integrity it demanded and retire with the security I had diligently earned over nearly 3 decades. But Apex, through the actions of Thorne and the willful blindness of Sterling and others, had forced my hand. Now, the consequences, long deferred, were finally arriving. My phone continued to buzz intermittently throughout the evening, calls from former colleagues seeking information. Texts from mid-level managers likely pressured by executives attempting damage control. I answered none of them. The window for quiet, internal resolution had been slammed shut by my termination. Now, whatever happened next would unfold under the harsh glare of scrutiny. By Wednesday morning, the dam had broken. Major financial news websites and the Cedar Creek local press ran lead stories, Apex Innovations Incorporated facing SEC investigation over accounting irregularities. Apex's stock price, already softened by recent market trends, plunged into a tailspin in pre-market trading. Financial analysts, who just weeks before had lauded Marcus Thorne's supposed efficiency measures and turnaround strategies, were now publicly questioning the veracity of the company's entire financial reporting history. A formal, courier-delivered letter arrived at my home from Apex's external legal counsel. It officially withdrew the termination notice issued the previous Friday and formally placed me on paid administrative leave, with full salary and benefits, pending the outcome of an urgent internal review. It was a transparent, clumsy attempt to mitigate legal damages, an action taken far too late to appear genuine. At 10 a.m. sharp, my attorney, Evelyn Hayes, accompanied me not to Apex headquarters, but to a neutral meeting room booked at an upscale hotel downtown, a condition Ms. Hayes had insisted upon. The same security guard who had supervised my humiliating exit 5 days earlier was now stationed discreetly outside the hotel entrance, nodding respectfully as we passed. Inside Apex, I could only imagine the atmosphere: hushed, fearful whispers, frantic shredding, blame being deflected in every direction. Waiting for us in the sterile hotel conference room were Arthur Sterling, looking significantly older and more haggard than he had just days before, the company's lead outside counsel, and 3 other stony-faced members of the board of directors. Marcus Thorne was conspicuously, tellingly, absent. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ms. Vance, Ms. Hayes," Mr. Sterling began, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "As you know, the company has initiated a comprehensive internal investigation into the concerns that have been brought to light." Ms. Hayes spoke before I could, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the corporate jargon. "Let's establish clarity from the outset, Mr. Sterling. Ms. Vance did not suddenly erase concerns after her improper termination last Friday. She meticulously documented and formally reported these serious issues, repeatedly, over a period of nearly 4 years. Exactly as her senior role in risk management required her to do. The company's documented decision to ignore those reports, to suppress her findings, and then to terminate her employment mere days before her full pension vested, That speaks volumes about the company's priorities and potential culpability. Mr. Sterling shifted uncomfortably in his expensive chair, avoiding Ms. Hayes' direct gaze. Yes, well, that is certainly part of what our internal investigation is examining, he conceded weakly. But I want to personally assure Ms. Vance, here and now, that her termination has been unequivocally rescinded. We consider her a valued employee in good standing, with all rights and benefits fully intact. Including. He paused, glancing at his lawyer. Including her pension. Including my full, legally vested pension, calculated as of my original vesting date next week? I asked directly, my voice steady. Pinning him with my gaze. Yes, of course, he replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. Absolutely. In fact, the board is prepared to offer you a special consulting arrangement following your retirement, which you can technically begin immediately, if you so choose. We deeply value your expertise and institutional knowledge, especially now. My client will not be making any decisions regarding her future employment status or any potential consulting roles today. Ms. Hayes interrupted smoothly but decisively. Furthermore, any substantive discussion about future arrangements must be preceded by a full and transparent accounting of how Ms. Vance's documented concerns were systematically ignored and suppressed by senior management and potentially members of this board over the past several years. The meeting dragged on for another hour, largely consisting of the board members and their counsel attempting to distance themselves from both Marcus Thorne's actions and the specific financial irregularities my documentation detailed. They carefully painted themselves as victims of misinformation, expressing performative shock and disappointment at the apparent misconduct that had occurred under their watch. I remained mostly silent, allowing Ms. Hayes to handle the legal thrust and parry, while I closely observed their body language, their shifting eyes, the carefully chosen words designed to minimize liability. These were individuals I had worked alongside, albeit at a distance, for many years. Yet, until last Friday, I doubt any of them could have picked me out of a lineup. Now, suddenly, they couldn't look away, their expressions a volatile cocktail of fear, feigned respect, and desperate self-preservation. As we prepared to leave, Mr. Sterling made one final, clumsy appeal. Olivia. Ms. Vance, we were hoping, as we move forward with corrective actions, that you might consider speaking positively with the SEC investigators about the steps the company is now taking. Your support, as a long-standing employee of integrity, would be invaluable in demonstrating our commitment to reform. I stopped at the door and turned to face him directly, meeting his gaze without blinking. Mr. Sterling, I dedicated 28 years and 11 months of my professional life to Apex Innovations, specifically focused on risk management and compliance. During that time, I filed approximately 50 major risk assessment reports, many of which documented serious irregularities and potential compliance failures. I sent at least 18 formal memos specifically addressing the accounting and operational risk issues that are now, apparently, under investigation. I requested no fewer than 9 meetings with executive leadership, including yourself and members of the audit committee, specifically to discuss these escalating concerns. Of those 9 requests, only 2 meetings were granted, and neither resulted in any substantive action or follow-up. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the suddenly silent room. At what precise point during that long history, Mr. Sterling, did I ever have your support, or the support of this board, in upholding the company's own stated ethical standards? The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. No one dared to answer. I will cooperate fully and truthfully with both the company's internal investigation, should they genuinely seek the truth, and certainly with the Securities and Exchange Commission, I continued, my voice calm but resolute. But please be clear, I will be speaking only to the documented facts, exactly as I have always done. Whether those facts ultimately support or damage Apex Innovations will depend entirely on the company's past actions and what your investigation uncovers, not on anything I say or spin in this room today. As Ms. Hayes and I walked briskly down the hotel corridor, she murmured under her breath, that of Olivia was perfectly stated. You left them no room to maneuver. It wasn't until we reached the bright sunlight of the parking lot that I allowed myself to take a deep, steadying breath. The adrenaline that had surged through me during the confrontation began to ebb, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion. But also a fragile clarity. This wasn't victory. Not even close. It was merely the first, painful step towards accountability. So, what happens now, Evelyn? I asked as we stood beside our cars, the city noise a distant hum. Now. Ms. Hayes allowed a small, tight smile. Now, they scramble. They hire more lawyers. They try to contain the damage, find scapegoats, and negotiate with the SEC to minimize the penalties. The internal investigation will likely be carefully managed to protect the board as much as possible. But make no mistake, Olivia. She met my eyes. They are utterly terrified of you and the evidence you hold. I shook my head slowly. They aren't terrified of me, Evelyn. They're terrified of the truth finally coming out. I paused. There's a significant difference. Ms. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Yes, there is indeed. And that difference, Olivia, is precisely why you will prevail in this. Regardless of how messy it gets. Driving home alone, my thoughts drifted to my late husband. He had always encouraged my meticulous nature, my insistence on getting things right. Even when colleagues found it tedious or obstructive. Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Liv, he'd often teased gently. It's your superpower. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been right all along. By Friday, exactly 1 week after Marcus Thorne had so coldly dismissed me, the situation had exploded into a full-blown corporate scandal engulfing Apex Innovations. The SEC formally issued subpoenas requesting vast amounts of information from the company. An internal memo, leaked almost immediately to the press, authored by Arthur Sterling, announced Marcus Thorne's immediate and indefinite suspension pending the outcome of both the internal and external investigations. Apex's stock, already severely wounded, hemorrhaged another 12% of its value that afternoon, hitting a 5-year low. My phone rang late in the afternoon. It was Clara Mills again, her voice still shaky but less frantic than before. Olivia? Hi, it's Clara. The interim CEO would like to arrange a meeting with you tomorrow, Saturday, if that's at all possible for you. The interim CEO. That had been swift. The board must have pushed Sterling aside, at least temporarily. The interim CEO, I learned, was Catherine Shaw, Apex's former chief operating officer. Ms. Shaw was someone I knew professionally, a tough, pragmatic executive who had always treated me and the risk management function with professional respect, if not particular warmth. She valued competence and results. I agreed to the meeting but insisted, through Ms. Hayes, that it take place at my attorney's office, not on Apex property or neutral ground. When Catherine Shaw arrived the next day, punctual to the minute, she looked exhausted, the strain of the past week etched on her face. But her eyes were clear and determined. She bypassed pleasantries entirely. Olivia, she began, her tone direct and businesslike as she sat opposite me and Ms. Hayes at the conference table. I won't waste your time or mine. Apex is in crisis. A crisis precipitated by greed, arrogance, and a failure of leadership. And you, frankly, are at the very center of uncovering it. Not because you did anything wrong, quite the opposite. You're here because, it seems, you were the only one consistently doing what was right. Even when it was unpopular or ignored. She slid a thick folder across the polished table, ironically reminiscent of the severance packet Thorne had tried to force on me just 8 days prior. This document formally and officially rescinds the termination notice issued last week, Ms. Shaw explained crisply. It retroactively reinstates your employment without any break in service. And it explicitly confirms the full vesting of your pension benefits as of your original eligibility date. Furthermore, she paused. Meeting my eyes directly, it includes an additional, substantial compensation package. Acknowledging the significant distress and improper treatment you have experienced. Ms. Hayes picked up the folder, opening it to review the contents. I watched her expression, saw her eyebrows raise slightly. She nodded curtly. The compensation package, she later confirmed, included a lump sum equivalent to 5 years of my salary, lifetime comprehensive healthcare coverage for me, and a formal, unequivocal apology signed by every current member of the board of directors, including Arthur Sterling. We are also moving immediately to establish a new, independent integrity and ethics office, reporting directly to the board, Ms. Shaw continued, her gaze unwavering. We would be honored if you would consider helping us design and structure it. Perhaps serving as an external consultant after your official retirement date, whenever you choose that to be. Your experience and demonstrated integrity are precisely what Apex needs to rebuild trust. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the implications. Reinstatement, pension secured, a significant settlement, an apology, an offer to help fix the mess. It was more than I had expected, certainly more than seemed possible just a week ago. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Ms. Shaw. And Marcus Thorne? And the board members whose negligence or complicity allowed this to happen. Catherine Shaw's expression hardened instantly. The internal investigation, which I am now overseeing directly, is proceeding rapidly. Criminal charges against Mr. Thorne and potentially others are expected, based on the evidence already uncovered, much of it aligning with your documentation. Let me be perfectly clear, Apex Innovations will not be defending Mr. Thorne or any executive found to have engaged in or knowingly concealed fraudulent activities. Justice, swift and decisive, it seemed, was finally arriving at Apex Innovations. It arrived definitively 8 months later. I sat quietly in the gallery of a federal courtroom in Chicago, watching as Marcus Thorne, alongside 2 former senior Apex executives who had been deeply complicit in the financial manipulations, stood before the judge. They looked diminished, stripped of their former power and arrogance, their expensive suits doing little to hide their defeat. Each entered guilty pleas to multiple counts of securities fraud and related charges, the culmination of plea bargains negotiated with federal prosecutors. As Thorne was led out of the courtroom after sentencing, a substantial prison term without possibility of parole, his gaze swept briefly across the gallery. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I saw a flicker of recognition there, not perhaps of me personally, but of what I represented, the unavoidable, personified consequence of his choices, the truth he could no longer outrun or dismiss. The Apex Innovations scandal became a widely cited case study in corporate governance failures, the critical importance of robust internal risk management, and the vital role whistleblowers play, often at great personal cost. I had politely declined the consulting position offered by the reorganized Apex, though I wished Ms. Shaw well in her efforts to reform the company culture. Instead, I chose to channel my experience differently, occasionally working with regulatory agencies and industry groups to help develop more effective whistleblower protection protocols and enhance corporate ethics training programs. My story, once public through the court proceedings, seemed to strike a chord. It reportedly inspired several other compliance and risk officers in different companies to come forward with their own carefully documented evidence of corporate wrongdoing, creating a small but significant ripple effect across various industries. The SEC, fulfilling its mandate under the whistleblower program, eventually awarded me a substantial payment, the standard 15% of the significant penalties ultimately levied against Apex Innovations, combined with my now secure pension and the settlement package from the company. I found myself with a level of financial security I had never anticipated or sought. With a portion of those funds, I established the Advanced Ethics Fellowship at Northwood University, creating a scholarship fund specifically for students pursuing careers in corporate ethics, compliance, and risk management. Naming it felt like honoring not just my own struggle, but the bedrock principles my late husband had always embodied. The most significant change, however, came closer to home. My daughter, Sophia, her husband David, and my 2 wonderful grandchildren relocated from Denver to Cedar Creek later that year, wanting to be closer after everything that had happened. Our weekends were now filled with the easy joys of family, noisy dinners, trips to the park, and quiet afternoons spent together at the small lakeside home I had purchased, building the kind of simple, Precious memories I had often missed during those decades of long hours and corporate battles. One crisp autumn evening, as Sophia and I sat on the deck watching the sunset paint streaks of orange and purple across the calm surface of the lake, she asked a question that had likely been on her mind for some time. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "after everything, all those years you gave Apex, do you ever regret staying there so long? Especially knowing how they treated you in the end?" I considered her question carefully, swirling the warm mug of tea in my hands. The bitterness of the betrayal had faded, replaced by a sense of peace and perspective. "No, sweetheart, I don't regret the work I did there," I answered finally, my voice quiet but certain. "I deeply regret that exposing the rot became necessary. I regret the dishonesty and the harm caused by others' greed. But I don't regret the 28 years I spent trying to uphold standards, trying to do the job with integrity." I looked out at the tranquil water, reflecting the vibrant sky. "Integrity, it isn't just about being honest when things are easy, Sophia. It's about holding on to your principles, doing what's right. Even when, especially when, it comes at a significant personal cost." Sophia nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You taught me that, Mom," she said softly. "Not just with words. You showed me, by example." And in that quiet moment, watching the last light fade over the Wisconsin lake with my daughter beside me, I realized that her understanding, her recognition of the value I had fought to uphold, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the courtroom vindication, not the financial security, but the quiet confirmation that the choices I had made, however difficult, had resonated, had mattered, had shown my daughter what it truly meant to stand firm in one's values, no matter the storm. As for Apex Innovations Incorporated, the company survived, albeit smaller, chastened, and operating under intense scrutiny. The new leadership, under Catherine Shaw's continued guidance, implemented stringent new compliance protocols and genuinely transparent reporting practices. They still sent me their official annual reports each year, perhaps as a contractual obligation from the settlement, perhaps as a continued, unspoken reminder, or maybe even as a form of corporate apology. I read them carefully, noting the improved metrics and ethical safeguards with a sense of detached, professional satisfaction. Some might characterize my story as one of revenge against a corporation that wronged me, but I have never seen it that way. I simply did what I had always trained and endeavored to do. I documented the facts meticulously, I reported the truth as I uncovered it. And I stood firmly by my professional findings. The only difference was that this time, finally, others were forced to listen.